In pro wrestling, you hear quite a lot of guys getting thrown together and put in a tag team because there's nothing for them to do in terms of singles competition. Some random tag teams do very well, some are instantly forgettable, but some end up becoming really entertaining and also pretty successful. The Hollywood Blonds, Steve Austin and Brian Pillman, was a team that was thrown together because there was no long-term plans for either man. Austin was promised a singles run with the WCW US title, but that plan was changed, much to Steve's annoyance. And while Austin himself didn't have high hopes for this new tag team when the idea was first presented to him, the Hollywood Blonds would turn out to be one of the best things Austin was involved in during his time in WCW. Brian Pillman benefited from the team too. Pillman was able to get much more creative on the mic and let his personality shine a little while being a part of the Blonds. And in the end, the team got so over with fans that the powers that be in WCW decided to end the run because, well, they weren't supposed to get over. Today we're going to take a look at the Hollywood Blonds tag team in WCW. A lot has been said about Brian Pillman's character work and his unorthodox loose cannon persona, but not enough is said about Brian's work as an in-ring performer. Before his life-changing injury in April of 1996, Brian Pillman was doing stuff in the ring that fans had never seen before, especially during his Flyin Brian days from 89 to early 93. While there were others on the roster who were high flyers, Pillman's ring work felt a little more daring, a little more risky, but Pillman was pulling off these moves that were more commonplace in Mexico and Japan, and this really helped him stand out. WCW fans couldn't get enough of Flyin Brian during his early days in the company. Brian won a tournament in 1991 to become the first ever WCW light heavyweight champion, beating Ricky Morton in the finals. Brian would drop the belt to Jushin Liger at a Georgia house show, but he won it back in a ridiculously good pay-per-view match at Super Brawl 2. Bill Watts took over booking duties in WCW, and seeing as Watts resurrected the old rule of top rope moves being illegal, there was really no point in having a light heavyweight championship or division anymore. The belt then was pretty much ignored without ever getting a true fair shake. The championship, however, was the predecessor for the successful WCW Cruiserweight division that was introduced by Eric Bischoff in 1996, and it can all be traced back to Pillman winning the Light Heavyweight Championship back at Halloween Havoc 1991. Stunning Steve Austin came into WCW as a heel, and 1 week after his debut, he defeated beautiful Bobby Eaton to become the WCW TV champion. Austin had studied the science of pro wrestling. He knew how to have good matches by understanding what he called the mechanics of pro wrestling. You can tell this too by watching his early matches. Austin had a diverse moveset that leaned more into the technical side of things, and he had the ability to make both himself and his opponents look good. He became a part of Paul Heyman's Dangerous Alliance stable, which instantly gave him more credibility, seeing as he'd be working alongside some of the top heels in the company. The thing that held Austin back though, and this is something he said by the way, was the fact that he didn't have the right gimmick. Trying to pinpoint exactly who Stunning Steve Austin was supposed to be in terms of character wasn't easy, and this was something the WWF also struggled with when Austin debuted in early 1996. But one thing was for sure, Steve Austin was extremely competent in the ring, and he had a lot of determination. Austin's work didn't go unnoticed. Dusty Rhodes told Steve that he was going to get paired up with Harley Race, and a run with the US title was also promised. But then, one day while at a TV taping, Brian Pillman approached Steve and he said, "Hey kid, we need to come up with a finish, we're a tag team now." Confused about this, Austin walked into Dusty's office to find out what was going on, and right enough, Dusty had put Austin and Pillman together as a tag team. This wasn't going to be a one and done deal either. Austin and Pillman would be a team for the foreseeable future. Steve Austin wasn't happy about this decision. He wanted the singles run, and in Austin's DVD documentary produced by WWE, Arn Anderson explained that WCW were looking for guys who could shift merchandise. Steve Austin was seen as a blue-collar guy with blue-collar potential. Those in charge didn't see Steve Austin as marketable. Where have you heard that story before? It's a bit odd that Dusty would promise Steve this big singles run and then take it away, but well, he ended up getting paired with Brian Pillman, and WCW had very low expectations for the team. Pillman and Austin's tag team was simply put together to give both guys something to do on TV. Austin and Pillman had teamed up before they were officially announced as a long-term tag team. Their first match together was back on the October 17th, 1992 episode of Worldwide, where Austin and Pillman defeated Chris Sullivan and Tommy Angel, and from here, Austin and Pillman worked a few further tag team matches on Worldwide and Saturday Night. The team was temporarily put on hold as Pillman was also teaming up with Barry Windham, and it wasn't until Windham was about to embark on a singles push towards the NWA title where the tag team of Stunning Steve Austin and Brian Pillman was made official on TV as a long-term deal. Windham cut a promo where he declared his intentions of pursuing the NWA heavyweight belt, while also introducing Steve Austin as Pillman's new official tag team partner. At first, the team was simply billed as Flyin Brian and Stunning Steve, and there's conflicting reports about who exactly came up with the Hollywood Blonds name. Austin said it was he and Brian during a conversation on the road, but Raven has also been credited for coming up with the name. Either way, Pillman and Austin would soon become the Hollywood Blonds, but they certainly weren't the first Hollywood Blonds. Buddy Roberts and Jerry Brown were the first tag team to use the name back in the 70s. Rip Rogers and Ted Oates used the name in the Mid-Atlantic territory. And there was a short-lived version of the Hollywood Blondes with Dusty Wolf, maybe better known as Dale Wolf to WWF fans, and Ken Timms. Austin said it was Brian Pillman who decided the team should wear matching outfits, and you get the impression that in the early days of the team at least, Brian was maybe a bit more enthusiastic about the Hollywood Blondes in comparison to his teammate. When things started going well though, and when Austin realised that he and Brian actually had a ton of chemistry, Steve began coming out of his shell more and more, and the Hollywood Blondes were off to the races. The beauty of the Hollywood Blondes was really how different both Pillman and Austin were. Brian was the brash high flyer, while Austin was the more no-nonsense grounded wrestler. The two played off each other really well to form a highly entertaining tag team that, even though they were heels, they still got fairly popular as time went on. What we'll do here is look at the Blonds' two main rivalries because both feuds let us see different sides to the Hollywood Blonds tag team. First, we'll look at the Blonds versus Ricky Steamboat and Shane Douglas, a rivalry that showed us just how well the team of Pillman and Austin worked in the ring. And then we'll take a look at the Blonds versus the Horsemen. This feud showed us just how entertaining the Blonds could be on the mic, and also, it lets us see what I consider the peak of the tag team. At Clash of the Champions 22 on the 13th of January 1993, Austin and Pillman got a shot at the NWA WCW Unified Tag Team titles, held by Steamboat and Douglas. The four men were put in the semi-main spot, they had the longest match on the card, and in my opinion, they done better than the 6-man Thundercage main event. You'll notice that Pillman and Austin didn't have their matching attires just yet, and they didn't have the Hollywood Blondes name. Pillman and Austin cut a pre-match promo also, and the general cockiness of the Blondes hadn't been established yet either. Pillman done all the talking, and it was a pretty straightforward promo. Pillman sure was confident though. The in-ring work during this match was absolutely phenomenal. Austin and Steamboat started things off with a lot of quickness and a lot of urgency. The champs worked better as a team thanks to their experience, but both Brian and Austin would gain advantages by outsmarting their opponents, usually by using underhanded tactics. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but in between all this you had some great in-ring action that made a lot of people take notice. Pillman and Austin together were incredibly good as a heel tag team. They made the champions look like $1 million. Douglas hits the belly to belly on Pillman, but the referee is distracted by a tired Ricky Steamboat. Austin breaks up the cover and he puts Pillman on top of Shane, and when Shane kicks out, the noise inside the Mecca is deafening. Steve decides to grab a tag belt and he smacks Douglas so hard that the dynamic dude gets busted open. The referee disqualifies Austin and Pillman, and the heels decide to give the champs a beating with the tag belt afterwards. Steve Austin said that Steamboat tore into Pillman backstage after this match for hitting him so hard with the belt. A great match here though. Austin and Pillman kept their heat, the babyface champions got some sympathy, and the people backstage at WCW had to notice that they had a very compatible new tag team at their disposal. The rivalry would continue on over the next couple of months. Steamboat and Douglas wanted to get revenge, and so a non-title match was booked on the January 30th episode of WCW Worldwide. This was another fun match, but this time, Pillman and Austin defeated their opponents, and what's more, they got a clean victory too. Sure, they took every underhanded opportunity that was presented to them, but the champions were defeated here, and surely this meant another tag team title match would be on the horizon. Well, there would be another opportunity for Austin and Pillman to win the belts, but due to the nature of WCW's long delays in between taped shows, the follow-up title match wouldn't air until a month later, even though it was taped the following week on WCW Power Hour. Pillman and Austin were defeated in the follow-up match, and they ended up having different opponents at Super Brawl 3. Eric Watts and Marcus Bagwell faced Austin and Pillman at the pay-per-view. But what's interesting here is the fact that by this time, Austin and Pillman were in matching gear. The Hollywood Blonds had more or less arrived, although they weren't announced as the Hollywood Blonds on their way to the ring. You'll notice during this match too that Marcus Bagwell and Eric Watts were no Ricky Steamboat and Shane Douglas. It isn't a terrible match, but it's not as good as the Clash 22 bout by a long shot. The fans booed Eric Watts too, which didn't help matters at all.
Gave him a clothesline. Watts in.
Austin lands a second rope elbow drop, and this allows Pillman to score a pinfall victory. Austin and Pillman rolled the cameras after the bout, and following this match, the team went on to WCW Worldwide for another match against Steamboat and Douglas. The tag titles were on the line, and Pillman and Austin won the tag team championships after another excellent match. Douglas and Steamboat stayed in control for much of this bout, but the referee didn't see Austin use the tag belt this time around. And a team who had low expectations end up becoming the NWA WCW Unified Tag Team Champions. After the bout, Brian Pillman said this is the kind of victory that brings joy to the hearts of millions of people. And Steve Austin thanks Douglas and Steamboat for saying this was the last chance Austin and Pillman would get at the gold. Steve says all they needed was one more shot. Austin then calls Pillman and himself the Big Blonde Machine, and this is repeated by Tony Schiavone. Not sure if this was an early name for the tag team.
About the 90s, the Big Blonde Machine here. Flyin Brian has done.
Well, the Big Blonde Machine, they are the...
Whatever the case may be, Pillman and Austin debuted their Hollywood Blonds tag team name on the March 27th episode of Saturday Night. The gimmick was now in full effect as Brian and Steve rolled the cameras, they patted each other down with towels, they fixed each other's hair, and they pulled off a nice double splash to end their match, known as the Double Atomic Blonde. The tag team of Brian Pillman and Steve Austin had proven to everyone that they worked well as a team, and they also proven that they had extraordinary chemistry even for being polar opposites in terms of their in-ring styles. Now it was time to show they could entertain and let their characters come through a little more. Before we look at the Four Horsemen rivalry though, we should look at Dos Hombres. Pillman and Austin weren't very eager to give Steamboat and Douglas a rematch for the tag titles. They were left out of a tournament to crown new #1 contenders, but Dos Hombres were part of this tournament. Dos Hombres was originally supposed to feature Steamboat and Douglas under masks, a way for the former tag champs to get one over on the Hollywood Blonds and claim their titles back. Dos Hombres defeated the Blonds on the May 6th episode of Main Event. Steamboat revealed his face afterwards, but Shane Douglas didn't. And that's because Shane Douglas had been fired from WCW. Under the mask, playing the role of Hombre Dos during the TV tapings was Brad Armstrong. And because Dos Hombres vs the Hollywood Blonds was scheduled to take place at Slamboree 1993 following this win on Main Event, instead of using Armstrong again, WCW used the Z-Man Tom Zink to play the role of Hombre Dos, while Steamboat played the role of Hombre Uno. The commentators still said it was Douglas under the mask though. The Hollywood Blonds won their cage match at Slamboree, and maybe the outcome would have been different had Douglas not got himself fired, but, well, it worked out well for Pillman and Steve Austin. Also, Tom Zink said that Steamboat unmasked during this bout to show that it was he who pulled off the dive from the top of the cage, and to also show that it wasn't he who was doing the job and getting pinned. If I'd done that dive off the top of a cage, I'd want everyone to know it was me as well. Ric Flair came back to WCW in 1993 following a stint in the World Wrestling Federation. Because he wasn't legally allowed to wrestle straight away, he got his own segments on WCW programming named A Flair for the Gold. A Flair for the Gold would feature different wrestlers as guests, and on the May 15th, 1993 episode of Saturday Night, just a week before Slamboree, the Hollywood Blonds were featured on the show. Now, this was where the Hollywood Blonds really began showing what they could do on the mic. They were already established as cocky heels that had elements of comedy, but both men also understood they were going to go up against the Horsemen, and if there was ever a time to turn things up, this would be the time. Steve says the Flair for the Gold set looks great. He and Pillman have been on quite a few film sets in their day, but Flair's looks pretty nice. Brian Pillman says it feels like a museum, and Austin wants to know where Flair got that old statue sitting at the bar. Pillman tells Austin that's no statue, that's Arn Anderson. Pillman compliments Flair's achievements in wrestling and he asks for an autograph. Not an autograph for Pillman, an autograph for his great-grandmother. Flair laughs it off, saying we all grow old, but only a few get great. Steve Austin has problems remembering the name of Flair's old faction. He gets a reminder that the group was called the Four Horsemen, and Steve says the Horsemen were good, but if they were around today, they'd get destroyed by the Hollywood Blonds, the team of the 90s. Flair tries to bring things down a little and talk about Slamboree. The show was going to feature legends of the past, and Brian Pillman says he and Austin are going to bring a nice home-cooked meal to the legends, and Pillman is pretty sure that Double A will be first in line, seeing as he hasn't skipped too many dinners recently. Arn has all he can take and he squares up to the Blonds. Austin wants to know if Flair will dust the mothballs off his wrestling trunks and get his robe made of pterodactyl feathers for a match with the Blonds. And A Flair for the Gold ends with Flair chasing Pillman and Austin off the set. Immediately afterwards, Austin says he and Pillman just gave Ric Flair his brush with greatness. At Slamboree, Flair brought back the Four Horsemen with Ole Anderson and Paul Roma, and Flair said the Horsemen are going to go after the Blonds, and they're going to go after the tag titles. On the May 29th episode of Saturday Night, Arn Anderson confirmed that Ric Flair was coming back to the ring. Flair and Double A vs the Blonds was booked for Clash of the Champions 23. The following week, Pillman and Austin presented their own interview segment to end WCW Saturday Night, A Flair for the Old. Out comes Brian Pillman with a walking stick and a grey wig as Tony Schiavone tries his best not to laugh. And this was a fun little promo here that you should check out for sure. Pillman says we're live from Nursing Home Paradise. Steve Austin is the guest on this episode of A Flair for the Old. And as Austin begins to speak to Pillman, Pillman falls asleep. Take note of the Pepto-Bismol and medication sitting on the little table. Medication that Austin throws into Pillman's mouth when it's time to take his nightly dose. The Enforcer comes out and Austin says the last time he's seen a body like Arn's, it had an apple stuffed in its mouth and it was rotating over an open fire. This makes Arn attack Steve and Austin gets thrown in the ring. Pillman gets involved and the show goes off the air as Ric Flair runs in for the save. Quality stuff here. Again, go out of your way to check this out. The two teams went on to Clash of the Champions 23, and if you're only going to watch one Hollywood Blonds match after watching this video, this is the one I'd recommend. For me, this is the peak of the duo where they had the perfect balance of showmanship and in-ring ability as a tag team. There's plenty to see here. It's a 2 out of 3 falls match that main evented the show, and the crowd is absolutely white hot thanks to this also being Flair's return match. I'm not going to talk about what happens inside the ring. I don't want to spoil much of the in-ring action for those who haven't seen the match, but the Blonds managed to leave Clash of the Champions still the tag team champions. Flair would shift his focus onto the NWA Championship, and so Arn Anderson would team up with Paul Roma to continue the Blonds feud. It was really after the Clash match where things started to fall apart for the Blonds. The team were able to beat Roma and Anderson at Beach Blast, but soon afterwards, Pillman injured his ankle. This presented a major problem because the Blonds were supposed to drop the titles to Roma and Anderson at Clash 24. WCW had already taped the TV shows that would air after the Clash, and on these shows, Roma and Anderson had the belts, so the Blonds still had to drop the belts even though Pillman couldn't compete. Steve Regal ended up subbing in for Pillman, and the titles were dropped as originally planned. With Pillman gone, Austin was approached by Colonel Robert Parker in regards to joining the Stud stable. Pillman came back and the Hollywood Blonds had a short reunion, but Austin decided to choose Parker over Pillman. Stunning Steve Austin attacked his tag team partner when Pillman attacked the Colonel, and so Austin would join the Stud stable, and Austin and Pillman would have a very short feud. So why did the Blonds break up? The team had probably been WCW's most entertaining tag team of 1993. Well, Steve Austin believes it was all political. They were just getting too popular. They got themselves over when they weren't supposed to get over, and someone in WCW who was booking matches and competing in the ring decided to end the tag team. Austin said, "If you're starting to get hot and you're starting to get successful and your opposition is people in the ring who have the book, they're gonna chop your legs out because they'll do whatever it takes to keep themselves on top. We never scratched the surface of what we could have become. The reason we were shut down was because we were getting over and we weren't put together to get over. We were put together to be mechanics for guys to get over on us, and it backfired on them. Ultimately, it backfired on us because they shut us down. Typical BS in the wrestling world." When Brian and I got word that they were going to shut us down, it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense at all because we were a reason for people to come to the show. We both knew exactly what was going on, and Brian was going to go his way and I was going to start my US champion push. They feuded us together and it was okay. We always had great matches together, but when we saw the end, it wasn't exciting, it wasn't fun, it was BS. Brian had a family, I had a family, we needed to support them, and we didn't have enough stroke to say, "No, you aren't splitting us up, we're staying like this." We didn't have that power yet, but if we both got rooted in a little deeper, and we were both further along in the business, I think we would have both stuck to our guns and stayed as a team. It just sucked when they broke us up because we were having so much fun. It was definitely an abrupt end to the tag team, and it's a shame too. There was so much more to see, yet it was all pretty much taken away from fans. And even though the Hollywood Blonds held the tag team belts, it does feel like we only saw glimpses of what they could actually do. For sure though, Austin and Pillman grew as entertainers and wrestlers while in the Hollywood Blonds, with both men getting a lot more comfortable on the mic, and both men putting on show-stealing performances in what could be considered a failing tag team division. Brian Pillman's son, Brian Pillman Jr. and Griff Garrison formed the Varsity Blonds in AEW as a tribute to the original team and a tribute to Brian's late father. Pillman Jr. threw out an idea for Steve Austin to come into AEW as a coach for the Varsity Blonds, making the team do drills and kind of portray this angry manager who would always be waiting behind the curtain to give Pillman and Garrison a mouthful if they ever screwed up. I'm not so sure if that's something Stone Cold would go for, but maybe it was also an answer that Brian Jr. just gave on the spot. In saying that though, I think it's pretty cool that Brian Jr. wanted to honour his dad's tag team. It feels like the Hollywood Blonds are sometimes just remembered as that old tag team that Stone Cold was in back in WCW when he had blonde hair. But you're in for a real treat if you haven't seen any of their matches before. I've mentioned a few in this video that you should check out, and hopefully, if you've never seen the tag team of Brian Pillman and Steve Austin before, you'll take the time to watch some of their matches after clicking off this video. But thanks very much for watching this one guys, I hope you enjoyed it, and take care.